Welcome back to Mr. Orth's Classroom for Grammar, looking at hyphens, dashes, and parentheses. First, a hyphen. The difference between a hyphen and a dash is that a hyphen is going to appear as though it's one short horizontal line elevated up off the bottom, not an underscore. A dash, however, is going to be twice as long, or two of those hyphens back to back without any spaces. We use hyphens first for compound numbers, things like 21 through 99. We also use them for fractions such as 1/3. Hyphens are also used for some, but not all, compound nouns. If you're unsure about when adding whether or not a compound noun needs a hyphen, I recommend adding one in. It's better off that you do that than to not be sure and either smash it up without using any kind of punctuation or leave it as two separate words and possibly leave your audience unsure as to whether or not it's actually a compound noun. And cross-references and great-grandfather are two examples of such types. We also do them for some but not all compound adjectives. So when we have kind of two words together, so if we say the performance was well received and phrase it that way, we don't need to put it together. But we have to describe it as a well received performance. It's not a well performance or a received performance, it's well received. Since those two words go together, we put a hyphen between those two. That might be new or a little confusing, but again, the idea is that we recognize that well received, that's the phrase that goes together in describing something, and therefore we don't want to leave it separate. Also, you don't need to worry about adding ly hyphens because the ly are already going to clearly be describing something else, so you don't need to have that together. Because lys, we remember, also are going to be adverbs and not adjectives. All prefixes, again, having the word self as part of a noun doesn't necessarily make it into a compound noun. It's just a prefix. But all, x, and self, pretty much generally speaking, we always put a hyphen after those. Hyphens can also be used to indicate when a word is cut off on one line of text and continues at the start of the next line. It doesn't apply to most of us in our everyday typing. However, in a journalism context where space is limited, or for example, if you're limited to one page of typing for an essay and need to have more to say, this can be very useful. In order to do this correctly, the wrapping of text properly, you have to break the words at the end of each line by syllables. Remember that you can't leave a single letter on a line by itself, either at the line before or the line after. And you only put the hyphen at the end of the first word. You don't put it at the start of the second line. So you don't want two hyphens around that. It's the end of the word that's broken off. Dashes, which can be either a solid line or two hyphens back to back with the space. Depends on if your computer autocorrects that. Dashes usually appear as longer lines than hyphens and are typed by tapping the hyphen key twice. Remember that at a dash, you leave no space before or after. If you don't, it might autocorrect it to something else. Remember that also audiences are more likely to read what is between dashes than what is inside of parentheses. So if you want your audience to read something, in nearly all cases you use dashes. If only some of your audience may be interested, then you might use parentheses instead. Think about using in-text citations. Most audience members don't really care about that, but some will, or it's just good faith to do so. So we have to do that, but since we don't expect people to read it, we might use parentheses instead of dashes. Dashes are also useful to indicate an abrupt change of thought or voice. Again, phrases that indicate style are wonderful with this, but not necessarily be necessary information. But again, we want people to read that. I recommend if you're writing an essay, at least once, use a dash somewhere in there as a way of indicating that you've got some personal voice and aren't just restating somebody else's information. Also, dashes are great for summary statements or restatements. Notice the example here. Haley, Enki, and Klamoa, each of these people had a comet named after him. What's important about this statement is that oftentimes we'll think that we need to actually have a colon here. We can't. As you may recall from an earlier lesson, colons can only come after an independent clause. There's no verb here. Plenty of three subjects, but no verb. Therefore, we can't have a colon here. We could have a dash because it's just a list. Whether we have the list at the beginning followed by a dash and then the independent clause, or independent clause at the end with a dash, then the series of three plus the end mark, of course. Parentheses. Two ways of approaching this. One, that they're actually useful information to give things for your audience that they might need most of the time or some of the time. Others, such as me, I would recommend that basically you only use these for in-text citations. but it's up to you. Parentheses are used for loosely related information or information that is important to a very small portion of your audience. It should be there, but not for most people. Punctuation goes inside of the parentheses only if a complete sentence is inside that. This is very similar to quotation marks. Otherwise, it goes outside of it. Again, if that whole thing was an it, do you need it? Because keep in mind, what's in parentheses can be deleted from the sentence. It's almost like it's not really there. If you take it out and a sentence would be missing an end mark, then you better have the end mark outside of it. If you take it out and nothing's wrong, no other sentence is missing an end mark, then punctuation clearly goes inside. My recommendation is use parentheses only for in-text citations for sourced or research documents, such as research papers. Otherwise, your reader will typically skip reading whatever you put in parentheses. An example below is that one recent study has shown, and then you have the author name, last name, and the page number, and the periods on the outside, because this is not the whole sentence. Everything else here is a sentence, and that's the in-text citation. Didn't give any new examples because this isn't terribly complicated, except for the possibility of the punctuation. You'll find that oftentimes the difference between a dash and parentheses is kind of a judgment call or personal choice. Again, you know my ideas on it. Talk to your current instructor to find out what his or her beliefs are, and follow that while you're in that person's environment. Good hunting.